Wicomico County's first county executive. And I even said heard him say he's Wicomico County's best county executive. I hope I didn't steal all your jokes, Rick.
No, not at all, except I will add that one asterisk, depending on your point of view. I'm either Wicomico County's best county executive or I'm Wicomico County's worst one. So,
the glasses always have full.
So far, I'm still the only one. I appreciate being invited over to talk today. I don't know that anything that I have to share is going to be news, particularly. I think most of us have kind of suffered through the last few years talking about our budgets and the state impacts on our budgets and what that's meant to the quality of life, but more importantly, how we've been dealing with it. You know, probably so far one of the things that can be said about what we've done is that we have steered our way through some pretty rough waters, and while we're not out of it yet, we have come through this phase of the recessionary period in pretty good shape. Our bond ratings have never been stronger in New York. That was reflected when we took out the loan for the Bennett Middle School. And so there is a lot to be proud of, a lot to be glad of in Wicomico County about our basic structure. The general topic for this morning was to talk about the impact of state taxes and regulations. And it's easy to focus just on that, but I'm going to try to give you a broader picture of how all of that comes together, as I say, that to impact and affect Wicomico County and what we're trying to accomplish for our citizens, because you really can't isolate these topics so well. So what I'm going to try to do is just kind of give a general overview. There's a lot of different pieces of it that I'm going to touch on, but if we have enough time, we can go back and flesh them out a little more at the end. But I'm trying to give you a larger picture of just what relationship we have with the state, what it means to us, and then again, as I say, how we're coping with it as we do what people expect of us. Most of you, as I say, are familiar with some of the most drastic state actions that occurred over the last few years as a result of the Great Recession. The most immediate and most visible impact was when the state confiscated, stole our highway user revenues. These are monies that we pay into from our gas tax and motor vehicle registration fees. And traditionally, it came back to us in the form of grants from the state. And most local governments, whether they were counties or municipalities, used those funds to fund their public works departments, at least as far as their roads programs go. When the state found itself in the mess that they did, they saw the HUR funds as easy pickings. And we went from an annual state contribution of about $7 million down to about $200,000. Well, as you know, our general fund wasn't equipped to fill that kind of gap. And so what we did was all of our county employees took 3 years of furloughs. There were no raises given for 4 years. And roads especially suffered tremendous cutbacks in personnel. We went from 5 daily roads crews down to 3 and then down to 1. And that's reflected when you see the grass not being cut and some of the roadsides, the shoulders crumbling because the money wasn't there. The collateral impact of that is we had to have some sort of roads program. We had to keep the roads safe, fill the potholes and such. And so we did take $4.5 to $5 million from the general fund to have some semblance of a roads program. Well, that was money that didn't go to education, it didn't go to public safety, it didn't go to all the other services people expect. And the impact has been felt. When I get to the piece of the most recent state impacts on our budget, we're going to remember the cuts to education because that generated a lot of where we find ourselves today that shaped the budget discussions of this year and last year. In addition to taking our highway user revenue, the state also passed down the cost of the state tax assessment offices. Now this is a state office performing a state function with state employees, and yet they turned over 90% of the cost of funding that operation to the counties for, what, 2 years at least. And then this year they backed it off to 50%. But again, that was a way for them to deal with their budget shortfall. We saw severe reductions in police aid, not only to the county government, but also to our municipalities. The big thing, as you remember, was teacher pensions. Again, something that county government had absolutely zero level of participation in, was passed down to the counties. And I expect that's just the camel's nose under the tent. the first couple of years was designed to be basically a wash, that there would be some some revenue sources provided along with putting the funding of teacher pensions, or a portion of the teacher pensions, on the counties, that was designed to make it a wash for the first couple of years, but that will be part of our regular budget in years to come. And we also lost some substantial open space funding, which again has an impact in those areas. I did want to just to provide a little bit of balance. You know, the temptation is always to talk about the big bad state, and certainly the state government makes it challenging for us, and it doesn't seem to matter which administration it was. I was in Fruitland when the Ehrlich administration came up with the flush tax, and we had to, and told us that we had to collect it, and so we had to put out a notice to everybody saying that, you know, this wasn't the local government, this was the state government working on our behalf. But I did come across a list that Tamara shared with you that.
No, Tamara hasn't yet.
You haven't yet, okay. We're going to share with you just a list of what the state does provide in the way of support for county governments and local governments. And what you'll find that in Wicomico County for fiscal year 2013, what is projected in 2014.
John and
there really is, I gave Matt his, let's see, John needs one. There really is substantial state investment in our local communities, and without them, we would be in far deeper trouble than we are now. You'll notice at the conclusion that from FY 2013, state aid amounted to almost $146 million. In FY 14, that's projected to go to a little more than $157 million. Now that's inclusive of the local governments, the town governments, as well as the county. But you see, it's not all bad. In fact, and this is relevant again when we talk about education, as much as the county had to cut our resources for education, or funding of education, you'll find that in the larger picture, the state and the federal government made up those cuts so that the funding sources for our local education community was generally flat. They did not suffer the cuts of 25 to 30 to 40% that a lot of the other departments did during the recession, so that as tough as it was to cut the funding, their overall impact was not as severe as most other departments. Part of, I think, what I was asked to talk about was the impact of state regulations as well. We are under, it seems like a real onslaught of new stresses and new challenges from the state in that department. And I have to tell you, when I graduated from college in 1974, I volunteered on the Homer White's campaign for the state senate. And he was here in Salisbury, was a former delegate. And the big topic of the day was land use and wetlands legislation. And the big complaint was the state was coming down and trying to take over all of our authority on how we manage our natural resources and our land and our zoning and so forth. And so I kind of get that Yogi Berra feeling of deja vu all over again, because it seems like after all this time, there's still the same thing is going on, and it's formidable. You know, we've got the septic bill that we're all concerned about, requirements for the TMDL, the total maximum daily load of the elements going into the water systems. We have the watershed improvement plans, what they call WIP, that we're going to be required to deal with. And we have the tier maps, which basically sets out all areas of the county in one level or another for potential development. The watershed improvement plans carry a price tag. The first estimated cost for Wicomico County, when we include all the municipalities, exceeded $1 billion. You take out the city of Salisbury and their wastewater treatment plant, just the county alone, it looked like a projected price tag of about $800 million. Well, I told them myself, I said, you might as well tell us to build a rocket ship to Mars. We don't have $800 million in Wicomico County to apply to this, and we're not going to do it. It's probably as confrontational as I get with not builders. But I said, we simply can't do it. And I talked to Secretary Rich Hall of the Department of Planning about that, and he said, well, it's not so important that you do that. It's just, you know, we need to see you making some effort at improving water quality and start down a path that's going to actually end up improving that. Well, I have a problem starting down a path if I don't at least have an idea of where I'm going or what I'm trying to accomplish. And so we've really not embraced that the way I'm sure the state thinks that we should. What we are going to do, we've been talking with a number of parties around the county, and some of you may remember just a few years ago, we went through a very painful exercise, again, talking about zoning and what kind of minimum lot sizes we were going to have for development. We got into the whole issue once again of property rights, property values, how we're going to protect our natural resources and so forth. And it was pretty intense, as it should be. I mean, we're talking about how we regard our homes. You know, we're very emotional about our homes, and we're very reasonably emotional and concerned about things that could impact our property values. And that seems to be a hurdle that always stops us from going as far as some people think we should. We've had our public hearings. We've had the usual concerns addressed by people that, quite frankly, are upset about some of the proposals. What we've come up with to try to get the debate on a higher level is we've approached a group of citizens from around the county representing science, representing appraisers, the banking industry, farmers, other committed citizens, to have a roundtable discussion. I maintain that there's not a person in this county who will stand up and say, I want to spoil the waters of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. I think we all want clean air, we all want clean water. I think we're all environmentalists at heart, or else we wouldn't live on the beautiful eastern shore with the bay on one side and the ocean on the other. We want everything clean and natural and healthy. On the other hand, if we own some property and we recognize that the development potential there may help fund my child's education, or it might pay for expensive medical treatments, if God forbid that should face us, or if we just want a decent retirement, we need to have some confidence. Or if we need to borrow for a large piece of farm equipment or whatever, we need to have confidence that our land is going to maintain its value. And that's a hurdle that we will not ignore. So we approached the Bosserman Center for Conflict Resolution at Salisbury University to help us get the right people to the table so that we could have an honest discussion about cleaning up the bay. All right, so you tell Wicomico County, well, you have to do this, you have to spend this much money, and you have to have all these programs in place to deal with stormwater management. Well, that's fine, but if all we do, even if we're successful, amounts to a tiny fraction of water improvement for the bay overall, and yet we've got an issue of tons of pollutants coming down the Susquehanna River from areas that may not be giving it as much attention as it needs to, what are we accomplishing? We don't mind doing our part, but we want to see it count for something. And so we have qualified people, intelligent people on both sides of the issue saying, well, if you do this, this will happen, and others saying, no, it's not going to happen, the problem is here, not there. And so we wanted to try to get people of high quality, good qualifications and experience around the table, and just let them have at it, just have a debate and talk about what they can bring, and hopefully at the end of the day, we'll come out with some middle ground that will actually allow us to do our part that we're responsibly obligated to do to protect water quality, but also keeps us secure in our homes and keeps us secure with our land values. We're not calling it conflict resolution, we're calling it collaborative dialogue. I think that really defines what we're trying to do. We're trying to elevate the level of the discussion a little higher than what you might get in a typical public hearing, so that hopefully when people talk, they do have a basis and a background for their opinions. And we're working on some dates now to get that together. We've got a very strong committee, I think. We'll be glad to share the names with you if you're interested. The meeting will be held at the Civic Center. It'll be open to the public. So we hope that that will help us answer our obligation to the state in a responsible way. This not just fulfills our obligation to the state laws that have, and the state regulations that have come down recently, but also puts us in command of our own destiny and gives us, maintains the control over how we handle our natural resources. And so we've got that to look forward to, and I'm looking forward to that. Now, I think probably the thing that you're most interested in, and the thing that's had the most immediate impact on Wicomico County and our budget process started again, with the recession and with how the county chose to deal with the recession, when 80% of your budget is devoted to public education and public safety, and you need to come up with millions and millions of dollars in cuts, spending cuts, because the revenues aren't there, there's no way to avoid hitting public safety and public education. We could wipe out the other 20% altogether and still not touch what our challenge was. And so for 2 or 3 consecutive years, we hit the Board of Education pretty heavily. And I don't think anybody was proud of that. I don't think anybody really thought that was putting us in any great shape, but we didn't see a lot of alternatives. We have to keep our community safe. You know, even though we, in our budget, we cut the Sheriff's Department's operating budget almost in half, we didn't cut personnel. We wanted to be able to say that during the recession and after the recession, there would be as many uniformed officers on the streets patrolling, trying to keep our community safe as there were before. So we didn't go after personnel, but we did severely limit their ability to train people and equip people and all of the things that come to as tools that help them do their job. But we severely cut education. The first year of the cuts amounted to about $7 million. In my budget, the second year, my budget cut Board of Ed another $5 million. Now that was the first year under the revenue cap that, because of the declining property values, the cap mechanism actually provided for about a nickel increase in the tax rate, just to maintain that 2% cap of revenues or the inflation rate. I'm not sure we've gotten to the 2%. I think the inflation rate has been below that. But the opportunity was there to raise the tax rate a nickel under the revenue cap, and we could have funded or limited the Board of Education cut to $5 million. Well, and there's no need to get into a discussion about the argument, but the council didn't agree to do that. They didn't raise the tax rate, and we cut the Board of Education an additional $2 million. Well, that created a shockwave through Annapolis that frankly put us severely on the defensive. It had gotten to be almost routine for me when I would go to Annapolis and testify before a committee asking for help for Wicomico County, that I almost, as an obligatory opening, would tell people, it's not, the irony is not lost on me that I'm coming here to you asking for help when I represent a community with a self-imposed burden on our back. You know, the cap, regardless again of the philosophy behind it, limited what we could do in raising revenues ourselves to take care of local issues. And when we would go to Annapolis, they would say, well, why do you come asking for all the taxpayers of the state to help you when all you have to do is negotiate with your cap a little bit and take care of problems yourself? So I always had that cloud. But when we cut education as severely as we did, that actually offended a lot of people, and too bad for that. But those lots of people have a lot of power. And there was a bill that passed in Annapolis that would have required us to reset our formula for providing maintenance of effort for the Board of Ed. And you're probably all familiar with maintenance of effort, but basically it's a standard of spending based on per pupil expenditures, and it's all driven by enrollment. Maintenance of effort doesn't represent an increase in funding. It doesn't increase doing anything additional or more from one year to the next. It's basically a status quo funding. In fact, when I was on the Board of Education, our goal was not the MOE line or bar. There was a bar called adequacy, which was another formula that was quite a bit above the MOE formula. That was where we should aspire to fund in order to do what was expected, what was mandated to our educational community. We never approached adequacy. In fact, it was all we could do to make maintenance of effort. At any rate, the legislation that was passed by the state would have required Wicomico County to go back overnight and repay the $14 million that we cut from education. Well, we didn't have it. That would have put us on the verge of insolvency. We just didn't have it. And so we went back to the state, county council and county executive, arm in arm, begrudgingly, but saying, you know, what can we do to avoid this? And a compromise was worked out where the agreement was made that the county raised our income tax rate to the maximum allowed, which at the time was 3.1%, the maximum was 3.2%. And if we took advantage of the tax rate increase, property tax rate increase that the cap provides, then we could be reassessed or rebased to the year before the recession hit. And that was something that we could afford and that was manageable. And so we agreed to do that. And so the county council voted to raise the income tax rate to the maximum, and we agreed that we would take the property tax rate to the maximum allowed under the cap for the next 2 years. That was last year's, or the current year's budget, and the one for next year. And that's why I mentioned at the council meeting on Tuesday. And I probably didn't say it as 100% accurate as I should have. We could have not done that, but the consequences of not raising that tax rate to the maximum allowed under the cap would have put us back in a position that was absolutely untenable. We could not handle. So the responsible thing to do for the last 2 years was to follow through with that. Now next year's budget will be free of those fetters, that requirement. And so I expect we'll have a pretty spirited debate about the budget next year, and throwing an election in is probably not going to help a whole lot with the atmosphere. But that has kind of been the climate that we've been dealing with. And again, it all goes back to education and our commitment to education. However, this year's budget with the state actually saw things start to turn around. Sources in the leadership of the state government tell us that whether we did it grudgingly or not, people were impressed that our county did go ahead and take our income tax rate to the maximum. They're impressed that we did agree to go ahead and take our property tax rate to the maximum. And so they went back to a funding source that had been a pretty good source for us in years past before the recession. That's the state disparity grant. The disparity grant recognizes relative wealth of a community. And not every county gets it, but there were a handful of counties in the state that would get a disparity grant of millions of dollars over the years to help us balance our budget and meet our expenses. As one of the cost-cutting measures during the recession, the state capped the disparity grant, and we lost about $6 or $7 million, I think, from one year to the next of what we could have gotten under that formula. This year, the state took they somewhat eased the cap, and we ended up in the process with an extra $4.5 million in disparity grant funding above the $2 million that we've been dealing with in the last few years, in order to make an impression to show that we understood the grand scheme of things and we understood the context of all of that discussion. We applied in our budget the full 4.5 increase to education. In my budget, we had added $1 million over maintenance of effort to the Board of Ed, but we also put in nearly $3 million for classroom security, for technology upgrades, and also to do a handful of capital projects around the system as needed. The Board of Ed wanted a lot more than that. I'm not sure they're really happy with it, but we did the best we could. I think that will make a positive impact on our relationship with Annapolis. Next year, we don't know what the disparity grant will be. I expect there's going to be some tinkering with it to, again, tie it to local effort, so that if you show that you're doing all you can locally to help yourself to bring in the revenues you need to provide services, that the state will be there with a more flexible disparity grant. At least that's our hope. All of this needs to be considered in the context of Wicomico County has changed. It's not the place that it was when I was a boy growing up here. We've actually become a poor county. Looking at the statistics, the wealth index for educational funding shows us as second to only Baltimore City in our poverty may not be the word, but in our wealth index for school funding, for calculations for school funding. We're only above Baltimore City in that. And yet, of all the state jurisdictions, we carry the 4th highest tax effort. And I think that came as a surprise to a lot of people, especially to people in Annapolis. And so it's given us a little bit more of a force when we go to Annapolis looking for support to say, look, we're doing our share. When you add in the taxes that our municipal residents pay and the county residents pay, matched to the changing demographics of our population, we're doing pretty much all we can. In fact, we're probably doing more than we really can. And I think that's going to help us, again, state our case when we do need to go back for help. But I think that's something a lot of us don't know. And one of the first things they told me was when I was elected county executive, I think this was County Executive Jim Smith from Baltimore County, said county executives don't get bad news. You let other people get bad news. You only stand out and give good news. Well, good or bad, I'm committed to telling the truth, and I don't think we're going to be persuaded to make the kind of sea changes that we need to make to deal with our challenges unless we acknowledge the truth. And the fact is, Wicomico County is in trouble. We have challenges, but I think we're responding well, and I think the potential is there. All the social things are there. We do have strong leadership in our community. We have strong people, citizens in our community who believe in their schools, who believe in citizen engagement, and we're making a lot of progress getting people to the table so that we can talk about the kind of plans we need to make. We're not going to just sit back and wring our hands and moan and groan about poor us. I remember growing up that there was a state senator from Somerset County. His name was Harry Phoebus, and a lot of people know some of his family. John Phoebus is there now. He made his living going around Annapolis talking about poor old Somerset. We need help. Just help us out with just poor old Somerset. We're not going to do that. We're Wicomico County. We're the hub of Delmarva. We're a place for new business, and we're a place for families, and we're a place where people can come and grow and be happy and enjoy the community that we have. And so that's the way we're promoting ourselves. And so we've started another effort. Based on a couple of studies that we've done, we hired the Sage Consulting Group, an internationally known consulting firm, to come in and do a financial overview of the county. Just how are we structured and how are we able to meet the commitments people expect of us. We have Beacon doing a 10-year assessment of the revenue cap, not with any particular goal or a particular end result, but just to assess the revenue cap after 10 years to see whether it's done what it was designed to do, whether there are some things about it that can be improved. Maybe it needs a little tinkering. What can we do to make the revenue cap more of a useful tool for us as we plan our priorities and we fund our budgets going forward? And so, taking the results of these studies, we've put together a new citizens committee. We call it our Visioning Action Committee. And we've got some of the heaviest hitters in our county companies. We've got the hospital represented. We've got agriculture. We've got business. We've got the minority community. We've got just about every segment of our county society represented at the table. And it's all people that have the power and experience of decision making, who can take command and come up with something that will work. What we don't want is to have another study that's going to go on a shelf and just be subject for remember when. We're going to meet again next week, and our effort now is to come up with achievable short-term goals that we can actually identify and accomplish this year that will once again start the motor of Wicomico County's industry, economic development and progress moving forward. I think the one overriding result of what studies and self-assessments that we've made is that economic development is the key moving forward. We can't tax ourselves back into prosperity. We can't slash services into prosperity. People expect a level of service and quality of life from their county government. And so economic development is the key. So what did we do? This year we started our Bridge to Business, and we came up with 3 initiatives to help foster a more aggressive business climate in the county. We went to Annapolis, and fortunately this was an opportunity, or this was an indication of having our county executive as the chairman or the president of Maryland Association of Counties this year. We proposed that our property rate, our property tax rate, and our personal property tax rate that business pays be decoupled. Up until this year, anytime a local government set a property tax rate or real estate tax rate that we all pay, the business tax rate or the personal property tax was automatically 2.5 times that. Well, people would say, well, I might not be as concerned about raising the property tax rate a penny or two or a nickel, but that's 3 times that, or 2.5 times that to our business community. And this is not the time to do that when businesses are also threatened with their very existence. And so I proposed it as a MACO initiative. Frankly, the staff, we start off with about 40 proposals, such proposals that we try to narrow down to 3 or 4. To say the staff's reaction was lukewarm is probably an understatement. I think probably because they figured this was such an ingrained part of state policy that it probably wasn't going to go anywhere. Again, this is one time where I put my foot down and said, we're going to have it as a priority. Well, my goodness, it went through Annapolis. I don't think there was a dissenting vote. And so now counties all over the state are able to set their regard and set their personal property tax rate on its own merits and the real estate property tax rate on its own merits. And in the budget we presented to the county council and was adopted, the personal property tax rate for our local businesses going forward is 13 cents below what it would have been if we had not done that. So I think that was a great accomplishment. We've also, working with the county council, agreed that we're going to phase out our inventory tax over a period of 5 years. I think we're the last, and Stevie said this week, we're probably the last county in the state to have an inventory tax. It represents some significant budgetary revenues for us, and so we can't wipe it out overnight. We're going to have to grow into it, but in 5 years, the inventory tax will be history. We also have a manufacturer's tax exemption that was routinely granted on application, but a business had to apply for it, and there was some amount of paperwork and bureaucracy that had to go through the process, even though you knew it was going to come out all right. Well, again, working with the county council, we agreed to make that automatic. So we think those 3 initiatives will help, we hope it'll help, create a little bit better climate for business going forward so that, again, we can concentrate on economic development as the way out of our current challenges and set the way for us to, again, return to where we were in years past as the leading economic bridge or engine for the Eastern Shore. That's basically where we are. Again, you know, the topic I think was state taxes and regulations. The thing I would simply say it's easy enough to talk about the state as the villain. You've seen that the state is a necessary partner. We have to work with them. We have to deal with them as partners. We have to stand our ground where we can. But there are a lot of carrots that come out of the state that help us do our job. We've had some challenges, and we're dealing with those as a community. I've never been more encouraged with the level of citizen engagement. There's never been a person that we've invited to come to the table and sit with us in any of our groups as we discuss these issues that has turned us down. I think the enthusiasm for Wicomico County and the confidence in Wicomico County has never been stronger. We know what we have here. We know we have a treasure. And we don't rely on this group or that group to fix things for us. We have to do it ourselves. So I am pleased to say that I think we're in a good time as far as our potential. And I think we're on the right track. There's going to be debate. There's going to be differences of opinion. And hopefully we'll keep those civil and we'll keep those respectful. And at the end of the day, Wicomico County is going to be the hub of Del Mar the way we all believe it is and will always be. So with that, I'd be glad to answer